It was the kind of late September afternoon in Maplewood, Ohio, when the air held a crispness like a new page out of a spiral-bound notebook. The sun was mellow, slanting golden light across the rows of two-story houses that looked as though someone had lined them up like oversized Monopoly pieces. Maple trees that gave the town its name were beginning to shift, tinges of orange and burgundy creeping in, while a breeze carried the smell of someone's backyard grill, charcoal, onions, and maybe a few hot dogs left too long on the flame. On Oak Ridge Lane, a cul-de-sac where every mailbox leaned slightly differently, a boy named Ethan Miller stood in his driveway staring at his backpack like it had betrayed him. Ethan was 12, lanky, with a shock of sandy blonde hair that never obeyed his mom's comb, and sneakers that squeaked when he walked too fast across the kitchen linoleum. His t-shirt was wrinkled with the logo of the Cleveland Guardians, and his jeans had a hole at one knee that he swore was natural wear, though his mom kept mumbling about sewing kits. But right now, clothes didn't matter. Ethan wasn't thinking about baseball games, or whether the hole in his jeans made him look rebellious. He was staring at his backpack because it looked heavier than it had ever been before, as if the textbooks inside had multiplied like rabbits during the school day. He had 3 math worksheets, a history essay about the Revolutionary War, 2 chapters of To Kill a Mockingbird to read, and, to top it all off, a science project outline that was due by Friday. It was Tuesday afternoon, and his backpack felt like a mountain. If someone were narrating Ethan's life, and today they were, it would go something like this. Every kid has that one week in school when the universe decides to pile it on. That week when teachers, who surely meet in some secret underground lair, say, let's test this one's spirit. For Ethan Miller, that week had arrived, and it looked like Mount Everest stuffed into a JanSport. The cul-de-sac around him hummed with the quiet soundtrack of suburban America. Mr. Franklin, the retired mailman, watered his marigolds wearing his Ohio State hoodie and cargo shorts, socks pulled up high in the way dads everywhere seemed to prefer. Across the street, the Johnson twins whizzed by on their bikes, baseball cards clothes pinned to their spokes making the satisfying flap 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 noise. And at the corner, Mrs. Ramirez leaned over her porch railing shouting for her son Daniel to get off the neighbor's trampoline before someone broke another arm. Life was normal, cheerful, suburban. Except for Ethan, who felt like he was standing at the base of Homework Mountain. He sighed dramatically, the way only a 12-year-old who believes the weight of the world rests on his shoulders can sigh. His dog, a golden retriever named Max, wagged his tail as if to say, come on, kid, let's go inside. Snacks await. But snacks would have to wait. Because inside, waiting at the kitchen table, was the real beast. The Miller kitchen looked like it had been pulled from a Home Depot catalog 10 years ago. Oak cabinets, laminate countertops that pretended to be granite if you didn't look too closely, and a fridge plastered with report cards, dentist reminders, and one family calendar filled with more sticky notes than a lawyer's desk. Ethan's mom, Laura Miller, was perched at the island counter, sipping from her favorite mug that read, "Don't talk to me until coffee." She was in her mid-30s, hair tied in a ponytail, wearing a sweatshirt with the school logo from Ethan's middle school. A stack of papers sat next to her, her own grading pile, because she taught English at the high school across town. Homework Mountain today, she asked, eyeing the way Ethan's shoulders slumped under the weight of the backpack. You don't even know, Ethan muttered, dumping the bag on the table with a thud that rattled the salt shaker. This is, unfair. This is inhumane. Kids aren't supposed to carry this much. I think I pulled a muscle in gym just lifting it. Laura chuckled, taking another sip. Trust me, I know. I've seen what teachers assign. But mountains are climbed one step at a time. Ethan rolled his eyes, but he didn't argue. Mostly because he didn't have the energy. Max, sensing tension, plopped down at Ethan's feet with a heavy sigh, like a furry therapist. The homework pile loomed in front of him, math sheets crisp and intimidating, history notes scribbled in barely readable handwriting, and that essay requirement glaring at him like a neon sign, 1,000 words. Who even writes 1,000 words? Ethan asked the ceiling. That's like writing the Constitution all over again. His mom gave him that look parents give when they've already lost the argument but let you tire yourself out. You'll survive, she said, setting down her mug. But Ethan wasn't convinced. To him, homework wasn't paper and pencil. It was cliffs and avalanches. It was icy slopes and thin air. It was a mountain. And he wasn't sure he had the gear to climb it. Now, let's pause for a moment. This is the part of the story where most people expect a motivational pep talk. A rousing, you can do it, champ, speech. But real life doesn't work that way. Real life in American suburbia looks more like this. A kid staring at a textbook like it's an alien script, a mom sighing into her coffee, a dog trying to sneak a pretzel from the counter, and neighbors yelling about trampolines. Motivation doesn't arrive like a marching band. It arrives slowly, usually in the shape of realizing you don't have much choice but to try. That was Ethan's first lesson at the base of Homework Mountain. He opened his math binder, pencil in hand. The first problem stared back at him, solve for X, and thus began his climb. Outside, the sun drifted lower, painting the neighborhood in that hazy golden orange photographers love to call magic hour. Kids were still playing tag in the yards, but sprinklers had started clicking on, spraying arcs of water that caught the light like diamonds. From somewhere down the street came the distant sound of a lawnmower starting up, a ritual no season in America is truly free from. Inside, Ethan scribbled answers, muttered to himself, erased, groaned, and flipped pages. Every math problem felt like another step uphill. At one point, he laid his head flat on the table and groaned, "I'm never gonna make it." Max nudged his arm, tail thumping. Laura glanced over, hiding a smile. Nobody ever climbs a mountain by staring at the peak. Just focus on the step in front of you. And Ethan thought about that. Because maybe, just maybe, math problem number 4 wasn't about the whole mountain, it was just about one little rock on the path. 2 hours later, Ethan had survived math. Barely. His pencil was shorter, his eraser down to a stub, and his brain felt fried like the chicken nuggets Dad usually picked up on Fridays. But he wasn't done. Next came history. And history, unlike math, was less about numbers and more about stories. Ethan actually liked stories, except when he had to retell them in 5 paragraphs with quotes and citations. The Revolutionary War essay assignment sat like a boulder in his path, discussed the importance of perseverance in the Revolutionary War. Ethan read it 3 times. Then he laughed. Perseverance. That was ironic, because if there was one thing he didn't feel like he had left, it was perseverance. But maybe, he thought, George Washington didn't feel like he had perseverance all the time either. Maybe soldiers back then wanted to quit too. And yet, they didn't. And suddenly, Ethan realized, this essay wasn't just about them. It was about him. He pulled the laptop closer, cracked his knuckles like he'd seen his dad do before typing work emails, and began. When facing impossible odds, perseverance is the difference between giving up and making history. Just like soldiers crossing the Delaware River in freezing December, students face their own mountains today. He paused, grinned. Maybe this was going to be good after all. Blank. By the time the essay had reached 600 words, Ethan felt like a climber halfway up the mountain, tired, sweaty, but realizing the view was starting to change. He could see further now. The peak didn't feel as impossibly far. The kitchen lights were on. Max was snoring. Laura was at the stove making spaghetti, humming to a Fleetwood Mac song on the radio. The smell of garlic bread filled the air, cozy and grounding. The house was alive, warm, American in its rhythm, the clink of pots, the sound of homework pages turning, the comfort of dinner waiting when the climb felt hardest. Ethan kept typing. Blank. And that's where we'll pause today, because mountains aren't climbed in one breath. They're climbed scene by scene, step by step. Ethan didn't know it yet, but he was building something more than an essay. He was building a lesson he'd remember years later. Homework is just practice for every mountain he'd ever have to climb. The evening in Maplewood deepened into one of those suburban twilights that feel almost cinematic. Streetlights blinked on one by one like dominoes falling in slow motion. Porch lights glowed amber. Somewhere, a teenager with too much confidence revved up his dad's Chevy Silverado, and the sound of classic rock spilled out of the open windows as he drove down Oak Ridge Lane, making sure everyone knew his speakers were worth the summer job at the car wash. Inside the Miller house, the climb continued. Ethan sat hunched at the kitchen table, spaghetti long gone, garlic bread crumbs still clinging to the placemat near his elbow. The family had eaten together at 6:30 sharp, because that's how the Millers did things on school nights. Family dinner, no phones, no excuses. His dad, Mark Miller, a logistics manager for a shipping company, had asked his usual questions about grades, sports practice, and whether Ethan had finally fixed his bike chain. Ethan had dodged half the questions with a grin and then slipped back into the orbit of his homework stack as soon as the plates were cleared. Now, the house carried that after-dinner quiet. The dishwasher hummed in the background. His mom graded papers at the counter. His dad had disappeared into the living room to watch the Cleveland Browns preseason highlights on TV. And Max, the loyal golden retriever, had curled himself into a dog-shaped rug at Ethan's feet, occasionally twitching in dreams of chasing rabbits. The essay was almost finished, 985 words and counting. Ethan leaned back in his chair, stretched his arms dramatically toward the ceiling, and groaned like he had just pulled a 12-hour shift at a steel factory. Done yet? His mom asked without looking up. Almost. 1 word left. She smirked. Well, make it a good one. Maybe something like perseverance. Ethan shot her a look. Funny, but secretly, he typed it. And just like that, the essay was done. Another rock conquered. Another step up the slope. But the mountain wasn't finished with him yet. There was still reading to do, and worst of all, the looming science project outline. It was 8:15 p.m. when Ethan dragged the copy of To Kill a Mockingbird out of his backpack. The paperback was bent at the corners, the cover already fraying. He groaned out loud when he saw the assignment sheet. Read chapters 5 and 6. Write down 3 character observations. Mom, he called dramatically, why do teachers make kids read 300-page books when there are perfectly good movies already made? Laura didn't even glance up from her grading. Because movies don't give you the same details. Now read. So Ethan read. But here's the thing about reading when you're already tired, it feels like climbing uphill in the dark. The words swam on the page, his brain drifted, and he caught himself rereading the same paragraph 3 times. Scout, Jem, Boo Radley, it all blurred together. Outside, crickets started their evening chorus. A soft breeze rustled through the maple tree in the front yard, making the wind chimes on the porch tinkle faintly. Across the street, Mr. Franklin turned off his porch light, waving at Mrs. Ramirez as she called her son in for the night. The town was settling down. Inside, Ethan rubbed his eyes. This is impossible. And then, like a climber remembering why he started the climb at all, he straightened up. He thought about his essay, the Revolutionary War, perseverance, the idea that history was written by people who didn't quit halfway through. If George Washington could cross an icy river in December, surely he could cross a couple of chapters in a paperback. So he read, slowly at first, then faster, then with curiosity, and by the time he'd finished chapter 6, he found himself actually enjoying it. Not that he'd admit that out loud. When he scribbled down 3 character observations, one of them read, "People aren't always who they seem. Sometimes you have to look deeper." And if you squinted, that note could have been about Boo Radley, or about Ethan himself, climbing a mountain nobody else could see. By now it was almost 9:30. The kitchen clock ticked steadily. The dishwasher beeped. The living room TV was off. His dad had fallen asleep in the recliner, remote still in hand. Ethan stared at the last task in his planner, science project outline. It felt like the final ice wall at the top of Everest. The kind climbers look at and think, no way. He flipped open the assignment sheet. Design an experiment to test a hypothesis. Write an outline of procedure, materials, and purpose. Mom, Ethan groaned again. Do they expect us to be Albert Einstein in middle school? Laura chuckled. Einstein probably forgot to do homework once or twice too. What's your idea? Ethan slumped forward, cheek on the table. I don't have one. Science is impossible. But then Max thumped his tail against the floor, nudging Ethan's sneaker. And Ethan thought, what about dogs? Everyone loved dogs. Maybe science didn't have to be impossible if it was about Max. His eyes lit up. What if I test whether dogs prefer classical music or rock music? Laura raised her eyebrows. That's actually pretty good. Ethan grinned for the first time that night. Yeah, I'll play Beethoven, then AC/DC, and see how Max reacts. Outline done. He scribbled down his idea, jotting procedure steps like a real scientist. Within 30 minutes, his project outline was finished. And with it, the mountain. At 10:15 p.m., Ethan leaned back in his chair, arms raised in victory. I did it, he shouted, startling Max, who leapt up barking. Laura looked over, genuinely impressed. Told you, one step at a time. Ethan grinned, one giant mountain at a time. For a moment, the house was filled with something bigger than relief. It was pride, the quiet kind that comes when you've wrestled with something hard and come out on the other side. Now, if this were a cartoon, balloons would fall from the ceiling. Trumpets would sound. A banner would unfurl declaring, homework champion. But real life in America is quieter. Real life looks like a kid shoving his books back into a beat-up backpack, yawning, scratching the dog's head, and trudging upstairs in socks that slip slightly on the carpeted steps. It looks like brushing his teeth while humming the last song he heard on the radio, then collapsing into bed with his phone buzzing on the nightstand, friends texting about Fortnite and algebra at the same time. It looks like a mom switching off the kitchen light, stacking graded papers in a neat pile, and whispering goodnight before heading to bed herself. It looks like a dad still dozing in the recliner, remote slipping from his hand, while the muted TV flashes highlights of touchdowns he'll barely remember in the morning. That's the real celebration. Quiet victories in ordinary houses. But here's the thing the voiceover must remind you, Ethan had climbed Homework Mountain. He didn't get a medal. He didn't get confetti. But he got something better, proof that the mountain was climbable. And that lesson, the one hiding under math sheets, history essays, and science outlines, was this: life is full of mountains. Some small, some towering. They'll come disguised as work deadlines, job interviews, rent payments, late-night worries, and yes, homework. You don't conquer them all at once. You conquer them the same way Ethan did, step by step, breath by breath, with a little humor, a little stubbornness, and maybe a dog wagging his tail by your side. Later that week, Ethan's science project turned into a hit. He discovered Max preferred classical music, falling asleep during Beethoven but tilting his head curiously at AC/DC. His teacher laughed, gave him an A, and told him, "That's the most relaxed golden retriever I've ever seen." His history essay earned him praise too, because his teacher underlined the part where he'd written, "Students face their own mountains today." She'd scribbled in the margin, "Well said, Ethan. Keep climbing." And math. Well, math was math. But Ethan had survived it. And survival was its own kind of victory. That night, as the Miller house settled into sleep again, Oak Ridge Lane grew quiet. Porch lights clicked off. Lawns lay still under the glow of the streetlights. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn blew, faint but steady. And in a second-story bedroom, a boy slept deeply, his backpack slouched in the corner like a conquered mountain. Because sometimes the greatest triumph isn't on a stage or a scoreboard. Sometimes it's in the quiet triumph of a Tuesday night in America, where a kid proves to himself that he can climb a mountain nobody else even sees.
Like and subscribe if you want to be happy and motivate.